There were these woods by my parents' house that I would like to walk through a lot. I found this one exceptionally little circular clearing within the woods. It sat by a little calming stream of water, and it had an enormous shake within the centre that I'd like to sit on and study my books. I figure you'll say I was a recluse child. One day, like every other, I strolled to the circle, sat on the shake, opened my book to the bookmark, and continued my novel. It wasn't precisely early afternoon. It was drawing closer the conclusion of the day, so it was getting somewhat darker within the woods. I was hindered by strides behind me. I set down my book and went into the trees to see in case there was a deer or other creature adjacent. Dark bears are what continuously stressed me as a kid. I listened more strides, so I taken after unobtrusively in that heading. Anything it was moving quicker than I'd possibly seemed, whereas attempting to stay quiet. The footsteps vanished. I figured the animal got as well far away, but as long because it wasn't curious about bothering me, I didn't care what it was. I started walking back to my circle, but as before, long as I got a see of it between the trees, my heart dropped to my stomach. There was somebody sitting on my rock, back to me, but I may tell they were holding my book. I didn't know whether to approach or not. I do not know, the man said out uproarious. I do not like this book, and turned to me as in case he knew precisely where I was standing, indeed still behind a couple of trees. He said, I observe you come here a lot. He had on this peculiar grin that quickly made me indeed more awkward. My 13-year-old self didn't have a fight or flight reaction framework. I, as it were, had a flight reaction intuitive. The man stood up and took 1 or 2 steps towards me, and I begun running. I knew the way back to my house effectively. I was there after a few minutes of running. That night, I got a thump at my window. I woke up terrified and shouted for my father. My father came surging in, and when I told him, he went exterior to check. I was shocked when he came surging in when I told him he went exterior to check. It was outright exasperating when he came back in with my book that I cleared out within the woods. He said it was cleared out exterior my window. I rested in my parents' room for like a week after that, and unnecessary to say, I never returned to that circle in the woods. Tennessee has a few genuine characters out in nature. I climbed all around, whereas in school there, and made a few great recollections with a young lady within the wrapping nature. Tennessee has good roads to prevalent hiking sites, and tons of smaller than expected trails branching off. Now and then you would like to know what to hunt for as distant as path markers go, since the curiously ones are continuously a great ways out. There's one spring waterfall that spills across an overgrown rock divider, towering over a shallow stream that purges into a decent-sized lake. I went out there with a companion final time, and we got isolated on the way out. I have no freaking clue how that happened. We've each been climbing for over 10 a long time. I've run over it 1,000 times in my intellect, and it must be this one wedge system. To induce to the beat of the drop, you'd like to require a long route that has an ancient wooden railing and a 3-way branching edge framework. So I've taken all 3 courses and finished up at the same spot. They take perhaps 3 to 4 minutes to impact through, and they're kind of like rough hallways. I do not take the cleared out one any longer, since I'm 90% beyond any doubt these enormous stains within the centre are blood. I do not need to know what happened there. It's odd, since the left is by distant the foremost welcoming. Blossoms sprouted from vines that are carved into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of her, and prefer the proper way when I realise I ought to tell her to avoid the cleared out. It's truly difficult to invert, given the inclining point of the right, and some brief drops that ended up contract climbs. Screw it. It's quicker in the event that I speed through and shout down and get out of the correct passage and swing around to where the centerway drops off. I shout, but there's no answer, so she took the cleared out. I run over and climb into the cleared out hallway, considering she saw the stains and cracked out. To be reasonable, it looks like somebody got clubbed passing. I ran up the hallway, but she was gone. I called her name, nothing, and that's what made my hair stand up. I actually listened, nothing. No fowls, no murmur of the woodland, not indeed wind. Fair myself, and the jabbering water. I followed cleared out all the way back and famous a few side sections. In case you miss a handful of the hops, nobody's in there or the centre, in spite of the fact that. Great. I figure I may as well get to the beat of the falls where I can get somewhat of an ethereal sea. I get there, and Ashley is sitting there holding up for me. She says she took the cleared out way with the path direct. What? There are no path guides. There are officers, but she knows the distinction. They would not be within the rock labyrinth. This fellow had a uniform and a path specialist visor on. She knew what I was considering based on my confront, and concurred that we ought to reverse course ASAP without us staying anything out boisterous. It's abnormal once you know you're being observed. We imagined we were going back to the car genuine speedy to urge more water, and so I cleared out a few angle nourishment in a small cleft, like I continuously did, and we cleared out. She appeared me this peculiar side entry that seemed not to have existed a year sometime recently. I strolled all the way around, and you had to hunker, but you'll walk through the maze in case you kept left, though insight into the past we shouldn't have taken another way. I think he lives in those tunnels. Ashley said he kept attempting to lead her in a distinctive course, but she just followed the light and saw him standing within the tunnel as she strolled the rest of the trip to the best. Meaning he was in there whereas I was searching for her, which means she followed him some time recently, seeing the blood splatters all over the floors and dividers. And that's not the completely underscore up portion. The angle nourishment that I left within the chasm was on the hood of my car. Her water bottle was gone as well. She had it carabined to her pack, so we must have snuck up and taken it at a few points. That's unusual since we're quick explorers. We never went back there and never will. I was taking a street trip in my Bronco from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. I as a rule keep crisis supplies within the trunk, such as water and instruments. I was taking, I figure, what you'd call a picturesque back course, since I enjoyed flying at tall speeds with the best down without stressing approximately other cars or police. This was one of those totally deserted seeming streets with one path on either side, and nothing but deserts, and cacti and bushes as distant as the eye might see. I was flying down this street when the car began to radiate these concerning popping commotions from beneath the hood, and the car began to jar or bounce somewhat. I put an overwhelming foot on the brakes to bring the car from a speeding 90 miles per hour to a well less than continuous end. I got out from the car, popping the hood, imagining as on the off chance that I'd indeed know what to anticipate, or how I'd go approximately settling it. There was no smoke, nothing like that, but I didn't have a clue what can be the issue. I got back in my car to undertake and begin it. As I dreaded, the damn thing wouldn't indeed begin back up. Presently, the car was a 1969 Portage Bronco, so yeah, it was an ancient car with its share of issues. Actually, I attempted to call my roadside benefit company, but at that point, it got to be more awful, realizing I didn't have any benefit, hence distant out within the leave. I was more or less stranded. I hadn't seen a single other car pass me that entirety hour I was driving on that street, and I was frightened to think how long it would take for somebody to pass. I held up on the side of the street, sitting on my car's trunk for actually hours, sweating my ass off. My spirits rose when I saw the sparkle of a car reflecting the daylight speeding down the street within the skyline. I jumped off my trunk and began strolling and waving my arms out for offer assistance. But the car didn't halt. It zoomed past me. Immaculate fiendish. I didn't know how some person may take off another human being stranded like that. Sunset came and the starvation was setting in. No cars had passed since the primary, and I was attempting to fill my stomach with the water bottles I had in my trunk. Inevitably, I saw headlights drawing closer. I had my car's dangers on, but I moreover waved my arms once more. The truck pulled to the side, and a reasonably huge man ventured out. I told him my car broke down, and asked if he knew anything approximately cars, but he didn't promptly appear inquisitive about my car. He more so appeared inquisitive about inquiring me in the event that I was alone, where I was going, and why I didn't fair call for offer assistance, and he inquired me in the event that anybody knew I was here. These questions were certainly making me awkward. He at long last advertised me a ride, in spite of the fact that in case he was attempting to form a point of making me awkward, he finished that. I stepped up into his pickup truck, and off we began driving. He said it would be a loan, whereas sometime recently either of us would have phone benefit. He began inquiring me more questions, like why I would choose to require a back course like this. Minutes within, the truck began to slow down. I listened him express __. He pulled onto the sand on the side of the street, looked at me, and said the piece of poop broke down. This couldn't be happening. I looked back at the man and realized he was still looking at me. Like 5 seconds went by, and he was fair still gazing at me. He at long last inquired me to go lift up the hood once he would wrench the latch. I can as it were depict this entirety circumstance so well, but through everything up until this point, I was madly suspicious. I went before his truck with a bit of separate between the front and me, and held up to listen a press, meaning the truck's hood was unlatched. In my head, I was imagining him trying to run me over, and that's precisely what happened. As I took one step towards the truck to attempt and open the hood, I listened the thunder of the motor as the man was on the gas. In case I didn't run for my life, I would have responded half a second later and have misplaced my legs or instantly been murdered. I took off running into the pitch black night, looking back to see the taillights still there, and at that point there were discharges. Without a doubt discharges pointed at me. That man was attempting to slaughter me. It was as well dull out there for him to conceivably shoot me dead without a few kind of luckiness, but I thought I was reaching to kick the bucket at any minute. I ran as distant as I could, then dove and made myself as low to the ground as conceivable. I listened the truck speeding off within the separate, so I turned and saw the taillights of the truck gradually vanishing down the purge street. I in the long run fell snoozing on the side of the street, and the bad dream didn't conclusion until early morning when I woke up to another pickup truck passing by. I waved them down, secured in soil and sand, and thank God this man was really normal, he and his spouse. They gave me water and drove me to the closest town where I was able to call the towing company. It was a 45-minute drive back to my car on that go-down street. At that point that same removed back to bring it into a shop. Long story brief, this was the most exceedingly bad trip and involvement of my life. I think somebody attempting to run you over and after that shoot at you isn't something you essentially get over. I had taken a working for a company based within the mountains. They advertised me a cabin to remain in where I was working there. It was an ancient domestic built into the side of a mountain and encompassed by the forest. I lived within the cellar, which had been changed over into a little living space with a lavatory, kitchen, resting range, and a clothing room. The clothing room was owl-shaped and had an entryway that went out back and into the encompassing timberland. The entryway that driven to the timberland was bolted from the interior and was very troublesome to open. I never utilized that entryway and continuously kept it bolted. The rest of the house was purged, but I didn't have get to it. After a day of work, I returned to my small cellar for an evening of perusing and playing solitaire. I turned off my light and begun to gesture off when I listened to clamour. The commotion was like wood squeaking. I played it off as my creative ability, but at that point it repeated. I thought possibly one of the cabinets within the kitchen was unlatched and had swung open. I checked, but all the cabinets were secured. I opened my closet, considering possibly something in there had made the sound, but once more nothing. The final put to sea was the clothing room. I opened the entryway that associated the house to the clothing room and was right away hit by a blast of cold night disgust. I gradually turned the corner and seeing the entryway that driven to the exterior fair influencing within the nighttime breeze. I am 110 I had this entryway closed, and like I said prior, there's no way it seemed open on its possess. I do not know what happened. Was there somebody holding up within the clothing room, fair holding up for me to drop sleeping some time recently sneaking out? Was it something powerful? Either way, there are few times I've ever felt such veritable frightfulness. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Midnight Mysteria, for more amazing horror stories.